Yeah, my name's Michelle Wax. I am the founder of American Happiness Project. And what we're going to be talking about today is the science of happiness and really how to start focusing on the things we can control, how the brain is hardwired in order to create more happiness and fulfillment daily. I am a three-time entrepreneur. I started out in the food industry here in Boston and was able to build two companies up over 5 years to have great clients, multiple six-figure businesses. And I got to this point where I should have been objectively really, really happy because I'd worked hard, I'd gone after what I wanted. And that's kind of what I had been told and sold my entire life, right? You work hard, you get what you want, then you'll be happy. And I found myself just waking up every single day and I had a lot of stress. I had a lot of uncertainty, self-doubt, kind of these more negative emotions that I really didn't understand because objectively, I knew that there was a lot of good things in my life, but I found myself waking up and kind of going into this automatic spiral. And so I started digging into the science of how the brain's hardwired, started applying those tactics into my own life on how to really make small shifts in the everyday in order to create more happiness and fulfillment. And really, since that point a couple years ago, have been able to build out American Happiness to have, a lot of press, a lot of working with a lot of great companies. And what we do is we combine, again, that very simple, easy to understand neuroscience of how the brain is hardwired, along with the practical psychology research that we've done throughout the entire country. So American Happiness Project started out as a documentary that was filmed across all 50 states. So I had this idea, these tactics and strategies and learnings had worked for me in my own life to really go from waking up feeling stressed and uncertain and worried to really having more energy and excitement for the day ahead and more fulfillment as well. And so, I figured, wow, this is really powerful in my own life, but I'm just one person, right? How do everyday people create more happiness and fulfillment in their own life, regardless of external circumstances? Because obviously things are going to go wrong in life, right? Stressful things are going to come up. There are going to be events happening at all points in life, all around us, that are not ideal. But how do you take back control of happiness in your own terms and start really building more of that and more fulfillment and energy daily? And so set out throughout the country here, went to every single state in America, and really we're talking with everyday people all across the country on how they're creating more happiness and fulfillment and really how they got past external events that would be pretty troubling or difficult for a lot of individuals. And so I chatted with hundreds and hundreds of people all across the country just in the documentary filming process. And since that documentary was filmed, have now chatted with thousands of people because we do an ongoing interview series as well. So our purpose of today and of this whole series we're doing with UConn alumni is really to give you guys practical strategies, tangible things that you can start doing day to day in your own life that don't take much time at all, but they're going to make a tremendous impact. And this is what we've collaborated and really congregated from all these interviews of what's actually working out there in America for everyday people. So our focus on this documentary was not necessarily famous people or super rich people or whatever, kind of the more traditional things that the media generally highlights. Our focus was more on these people are waking up every single day and they're living fulfilling lives. They're feeling excited for the day ahead. So was doing a lot of informal interviews like you see here in farmers markets, restaurants, bars, just people I would talk to, as well as more formal interviews that are actually in the documentary itself. So sitting down one-on-one with people and really getting the stories and more the qualitative side of happiness and how to create it in their own life. And so, like I was saying, want to get a wide range of individuals. Monroe had been in jail. Austin had his house blown away by a tornado in Kentucky. June had stage 3 cancer. And Veronica just really didn't like her job very much. So I was chatting with all these different types of people and all different walks of life and backgrounds. And there were some major themes and strategies and things they were doing daily that were a common theme on how to build more happiness, opportunity, that positive mindset. So now what we do is we build out programs with this ongoing research and interviews and surveying that we do all across the country, tie it in with the neuroscience of how the brain is wired. And again, like I was saying earlier, what I want you guys to get out of today is at least one thing that you can start doing that resonates with you in your day-to-day life to build more happiness or energy or fulfillment. So today what we're going to be talking about is the neuroscience behind happiness levels, how your brain is really not hardwired to bring about happiness naturally. The number one factor we found continuously in doing our research across the country for this long-term happiness and fulfillment, and also the dangers of positive thinking, because I like to call this out right away. Happiness is in our brand name, American Happiness Project. And happiness is a very fluffy word to a lot of people, right? It's going to mean different things for different people. But positive thinking right away, if you're not at a certain baseline, is actually more detrimental than it's really showcased to believe in a lot of areas. And then finally, those simple things you can start doing today to really start using your brain's wiring to your advantage. And so I'm going to be sharing a bit of our research, a bit of the science, and then we're going to get into that more interactive portion a little bit later on where you guys are interacting with one another. All right. So to get into the science, I want to take you guys back hundreds of thousands of years ago, back when we were first wired as human beings, back when we were first really created. And if you think about it, back in our primal days, really what we had to avoid or had to be on high alert for was a wild animal attacking us, right? Or scavenging for food in the forest, or making sure that our communities and our families were protected. And so we really had to be on high alert at all times for what could go wrong, because our brains were wired to protect us and to keep us safe, right? We had to be on high alert. We had to look out for potentially the animal lurking in the bushes. And really was our top priority, was to keep ourselves safe and to keep ourselves alive in our very, very primal core. And so your brain was wired to protect you. It was wired to keep you in the familiar, in the comfortable. And we're really at a battle with our primitive wiring for happiness because we're wired to be on high alert at all times for what could go wrong. And this is why it's so easy to look at all the potential things in the future or maybe in the past that have gone wrong, that could spiral, that could go wrong. Very rarely are we thinking about what could go right? Very often it's the worst case scenario, or if this leads to that, what could happen? That's because your brain is just naturally wired to go down that path. And so it's really not your fault if you experience stress, anxiety, self-doubt, worry. There's obviously a lot of external events happening in the world right now that could potentially trigger that or cause that. And it's why a lot of kind of the negativity out in the world exists, is because our brains are wired to go down that place naturally. It's wild to go down a path of slightly negative or complaining or looking out for all the things that could go wrong versus focusing on the other end of it, the more positive opportunity side. And so this is also why, in addition to thinking about everything that could go wrong, whether it be in your personal life, professional life, world events, whatever it may be, it's also why when you have an idea, something new in your life, or maybe you want to try something new or take some new action, you're likely going to start to poke holes in that thought or that idea, or second guess yourself about it. And this is where the self-doubt comes in, the lack of confidence for something new that we've never done before. That's because your brain is wired to keep you safe and keep you familiar and keep you comfortable, right? And so we're always going to go back to that place of feeling safe because your brain is hardwired to do it if you're operating on your default wiring. And every single human being is born with this default wiring, this primal wiring of, keeping yourself safe, for looking at what could go wrong. Because at our core, we're designed to protect ourselves and the people around us. So that's a little bit about the science. And as I learned this is, again, very high level. But as I learned, okay, I'm waking up, I'm not feeling the best, I'm feeling kind of stressed, I have the self-doubt. How do I get out of this state, right? How do I create more belief, more confidence, more looking for the opportunity versus dwelling on all the things going wrong or the stressful events or the worry? And so started again implementing the tactics and strategies we're going to get into a few later today, and it made a tremendous impact in my own life. But I really wanted to see, does this work for other people, right? And how many people does it work for? What are people besides myself doing to really create this in their own life? And the number one factor across the country that we found throughout the documentary filming and in our newest project called American Goodness, where we're interviewing people now via Zoom and connecting with them there, is really creating a positive mindset. And how I define mindset is really the filter that your brain is internally processing the world, yourself, and your circumstances around you, right? It is really the filter that you put on your life. And I'll give you an example that I had recently. I was at the post office and I was standing in line outside. I live in Boston, so the lines are like a little bit long now for the post office. And I'm waiting in line, and the couple in front of me, they were just really aggravated they were in that line, right? They were kind of taking it out on each other. They're kind of bickering. They're clearly just not thrilled that they are in that post office line. And I turn behind me and I see a woman who had just brought a book to read and she was waiting in line. She'd brought a physical book and, she just seemed to be most of that situation. And it's interesting to me because here these two people are in the exact same situation, right? Exact same line, exact same post office. They're having completely different experiences. And this is really mindset at its truest form, is how you're interpreting the events happening around you, what's happening in your personal life, your inner dialogue and inner self-talk as well, all influenced by this mindset. And this was interesting to find out for me because, as I mentioned at the beginning, I had really been taught that happiness was more of a destination, right? It comes to you, it arrives when you get the job you want, or when you buy the house, or when you get married, or when you travel that place you always wanted to travel to. Whatever it might be for you, I was really taught and sold that it's this destination. But in doing the research into the studies that scientists and researchers have done, it was very interesting to find that only approximately 10% or so of your happiness depends on these external circumstances. So it's not as much as we are conditioned or often taught to believe, these external factors. And so what I mean by external things are things like your income level, job title, material things, where you live, what's happening around you. Only 10% of your long-term happiness depends on external circumstances. And of course, these things can bring in short-term happiness, right? If you buy new, you're often going to get a spike of short-term happiness or excitement around that. But long-term, these factors don't really account for too much. And you've probably experienced this in your own life, right? I know I talk with so many people now where, you reach, maybe you got the promotion you always wanted, or you bought that thing, or you got into the relationship that you always wanted with that perfect person. And you're not generally, you might be happy for a couple days or a couple hours, but what happens after that short amount of time period once you get the promotion, right? You generally go back to your level of happiness, new problems come up, stressors come up, and we drop back down baseline, whatever it is. So in doing, our more practical psychology research, as well as looking into the scientific papers and journals that have been done on this topic, your happiness really depends heavily on how your brain is internally processing and viewing the world, right? And this is your mindset. And so the research that's been done in this, along with our documentary filming and interviews, it all aligned perfectly. And this is often, if you guys know someone in your own life that, maybe they've gone through really difficult times, or they kind of keep getting just punched and beaten down, right? But they're the most happy and generous person right? They're always there for other people. They're always trying to lift other people up, even when they themselves are going through difficult times. And on the flip side of that, we've also all heard the stories of, maybe you have someone like this in your own life. They're doing really well, maybe career-wise or financially, but they're miserable, or they're burnt out, or they're stressed all the time, right? And this is because those external things, they don't really matter as much long term as this mindset, as this internal interpretation that's happening all day, every day. It's happening with every single conversation you have, every single news article you read, really every single text message. Anything that's happening in your life is going through this filter this mindset that you have. And so it's been shown that mindset accounts for up to 55%. This is actually a more conservative number. It can be a little bit higher than this as well. But your mindset is really, really powerful in long-term happiness. And we're going to get into how to actually start crafting a more positive mindset that's going to lead to this, because our mind is not designed to have this positive mindset. It's designed to have a more negative mindset. And, there's a lot of other benefits as well. Obviously, you're going to have more energy, more productivity, higher likelihood of getting promoted, higher longevity, as well as higher level of sales and more creativity as well with this positive mindset. But our brain's natural mindset, back in our primal times, remember how we're wired as human beings from birth, is going down that place for looking at what could go wrong, for thinking we're not good enough, because our minds internally, our brains are pushing us back into the comfortable, the safety, the familiar. And it's anything that's different than that, it's going to start to poke holes in or kind of question if we don't have a trained mind around that. So in learning all this research, right, as I mentioned before, it's, maybe you're thinking in a certain way today, or maybe there's been some stressful events or things happening in your life that isn't making you feel the best, right? I don't know many people that enjoy feeling stressed or worried or having that self-doubt, but it can feel like that's just how it is, right? And so I was really interested in discovering how people really have created that positive mindset, have taken this more negative mindset that we're all wired with, right? There's nothing wrong with anyone. It's just that's your natural primal default wiring, and really recrafting it to build more positivity, opportunity for looking for the solution or the good in a situation that others might feel like it doesn't even exist. All right. So we're going to get into how to start creating a positive mindset. And the biggest thing with this is that it's really a consistent effort. So I like to tie it or compare it into if you started going to the gym or maybe eating healthier, right? Obviously, you're not going to have results overnight. It's more important to be consistent with this method than in just doing it, in a kind of a highly motivated spurt and then dropping off from it. So consistency is really powerful in this. And to get into the science a little bit here with how to create a positive mindset, I want to introduce you guys to a concept called neuroplasticity. And this is basically saying that your brain is constantly changing. It's always evolving, it's always growing, it's always really crafting itself through neural pathways. And this is actually a fairly new concept in the scientific community. Up until a couple decades ago, most scientists believed that once you reach a certain age in your life or a certain stage in your life, that's just who you are as a person, right? And that's where the common phrases such as, that's just the way he is, or that's just the way she is, come from. But it's actually been proven now to be just the opposite. Your mind is constantly changing, constantly evolving. And to illustrate this point a little bit more as we get into it, I want you guys to think about the last time that you went for a hike in the woods, or maybe just a walk even on some trails, right? Generally, when you arrive to the parking lot or arrive to the entrance, you'll notice there's one really paved out pathway or mulched out pathway, kind of similar to what you see here in the photo. But as you walk along that pathway, you'll notice that, of course, other trails are broken off, right? You can kind of branch off and go down a different trail. And some trails are clearly defined, right? They have a marker, or it's pretty obvious that's a trail. But other trails, they're not as clearly defined, right? They have some branches in the way. Maybe there's a couple footprints. You start walking down it. You're like, oh, actually, nope, that wasn't a trail. Come back down and go a different direction, right? I know I've done that plenty of times. And so taking this illustration of a forest, I want you guys to imagine the most complex forest you ever could, millions and millions of trails, and that is the human brain. So your brain is made up of all these different pathways, all these different trails that are really being created and overgrown constantly, right? As you're listening to this right now, as you go about your days. And how these pathways are carved out in the brain are through your thought process. It's that internal processing that we talked about a couple minutes ago. And so every single time you have a thought about anything at all in any area of your life, these neural pathways are being carved out, they're being blazed out, just like you see in the photo here. This is the best photo I could find to kind of illustrate this point. But every single time you have a thought, you're blazing out a trail, and you're either reinforcing a trail you currently have or you're creating a new one. And we have up to 60,000 thoughts per day. So there's a lot of opportunity to start using these trails and this wiring and this blazing out of pathways to your advantage, because we have so many thoughts per day. There's a lot of opportunity here. Now, these neural pathways that form this forest in your mind, this really complex millions and millions of pathways that are constantly firing and being formed, construct your mindset, right? And that's that internal filter, going back to the post office story, that determines, am I going to react to this situation in one way or another? And your neural pathways, this complex forest of your mind, really forms your habits of thinking, feeling, and acting. And often when we think about habits, it's more of an action-oriented kind of first thought, right? So you either work out or you don't. You either eat healthy or you don't, right? You go to bed early or you don't. These are kind of the more of the habits that are talked about. But you can also have habits of thinking and feeling as well, right? When you read an email that is not the most pleasant email, what is your first thought? Where do you think? How does your emotions go? How do you start feeling, right? When you read a stressful news article, what are your thinking patterns? What are your feeling patterns, right? When you're interacting with different people, these habits are being formed, and they really are creating that mindset, that filter that we're processing the world with, that really goes into our long-term happiness a lot more than we're often taught to believe. Now, this force of your mind determines a lot. It's how you respond to events. It's your approach to life, the meaning you're creating each and every day, even in the more mundane days. What meaning and fulfillment are you creating? The joy you feel each and every day, the interpretation you have of conversations or maybe text messages you receive, and also if something is good or bad or neutral. So it's really, again, it's firing off constantly, and it's really affecting every single interaction, every thought you have with yourself and with others as well. And the reason I'm harping on thought process so much is because really everything starts with a thought, right? If you try to think of your next thought right now, think of what you're going to think of next, you probably can't do it, right? And so everything begins with thought, which leads to your beliefs, right? And your beliefs lead to your actions. If you don't believe something's possible, if you don't believe that's the way it is, if you don't believe that's who you are as a person, you're never going to take action on it. And if you don't take action, nothing's ever going to change, right? Your actions lead to the outcome of your life and what's happening in your life as well. And so it really all begins with our thought process. And this is really the core of change that we've seen. Americans all across the country have started with their thought process, that interpretation, that mindset, in order to craft a life full of more fulfillment and meaning in the everyday. So every single time you have a thought, again, you're reinforcing a trail in your own mind. So it's either firing off, creating a new trail, reinforcing an existing trail. And the beautiful thing about the human mind is that in the same way that a forest is constantly evolving and developing, you can also allow trails to overgrow that are not helping you anymore, right? Maybe those more negative emotion trails or the stressful trails or things that aren't really helping you become who you want to be or get to where you want to be. You can allow those to overgrow, so it's more difficult to get down those pathways, and it's easier for your brain to go down pathways that are serving you, right? That are leading toward the opportunity, the confidence, the belief, whatever it is that you're looking to create or reinforce for yourself. And one other thing I want to note about the human brain is it's always going to go down the easiest path. It's always going to go down the path that's most carved out. And so that's why I mentioned consistency with these tactics we're going to get into is even more important than the length of time you're spending on them, because every single time you have a thought, you're reinforcing, you're applying these strategies, it's carving out that trail deeper and deeper and deeper. So as we go throughout the rest of the presentation, which is a little bit more tactical, I just want you guys to think about, where your trails are leading you. And just think about, in your day-to-day life, what things might be triggering you to go down a trail that's not really helping. And on the flip side of that, what trails are, really good in certain situations? Where are you going to that belief, that optimism, that happiness, that joy, that fulfillment, whatever it is for you? So let's get tactical. And so throughout these exercises, we are going to do a couple breakout rooms and then also a couple exercises where I just ask you guys to type your response in the chat as well, just so we have some engagement there. So the first part that we've heard throughout during all our research in really crafting this positive mindset is building self-awareness. And as I define self-awareness, it's really what you're thinking about as you're thinking about it, right? Just being aware of that, being conscious of it. And this is actually fairly difficult to do because if you remember from before, we have up to 60,000 thoughts per day. So a lot of times these thoughts are coming and going, right? These trails are being carved out. We're going to these places in our mind. I know personally, I've done this many times where it's like you kind of get locked into this spiral of thinking, right? You think of one thought and it spirals to another, and then it spirals to another, and you kind of find yourself in this hole of thinking, how did I even get here? So really what we want to do is we want to bring some awareness to the thoughts and the patterns that are not helping as much and start, again, carving out those pathways that are going to help us get to that more positive mindset, those more positive emotions. So what I encourage you guys to do is to track your thoughts for one day. And we actually have a resource. We have a tracking workbook that is completely free. I'll share the link at the end of this so you guys have that. But it's really helpful to track just for a day. If you can do it for a couple days, even better, because you'll have more of a more content, obviously, to look at. But really, what are you thinking about when you wake up? What's your first thought in the morning? Are you going to a place of thinking about everything that has to get done that day or everything that could go wrong that day? Or are you thinking, what you're excited about, what you're grateful for that morning? When you check your email during lunch, before you go to sleep, when you're with certain people, when you're in meetings, right? While you're eating dinner, what are you thinking about? And as you're tracking, if you don't download our workbook, if you want to do it on your own, just make sure you're tracking every couple hours. Again, what's your thought in that moment and how is it making you feel? Is it a more negative emotion or more positive? The second part of this is we want to break and replace the pattern. So again, go back to that forest of your mind. We want to stop ourselves from blazing out pathways that are going to those more negative places that maybe aren't helping us, like the stress, the worry, the uncertainty, the self-doubt. So we want to stop that pathway and really retarget or refocus that thought pattern to go to one that's going to be more helpful. So once you have your list of thoughts, when you start to go down a place of less than ideal in general, what we want to do is we want to break the thought pattern. We want to cut off that trail in our minds and go reroute it to a different direction. And I'll give you guys an example. I was talking with someone that I'm working with one-on-one the other day, and they were saying that they've just been feeling really stressed recently. And I think that's pretty common currently. There's a lot going on. And what happened is he would think of one thought that was stressful, right? Maybe he read a news article or got an email from his boss, and then he would think of something else that was stressful, and then it would just be this plummet, right? This spiral. And so what I encouraged him to do is to really, when he realizes he's having a stressful thought, to acknowledge it and to go through this 3-step process that we're going to get into. And this process is very straightforward to do, but it's going to feel a little weird at first. It's going to take consistent effort to actually start implementing into your life, because I assume that most people haven't actually done this before. Most of our thoughts just come and go, and it's interesting, and it's kind of a new approach to actually start interrupting these patterns and thinking, is this actually helping me or is it not? So the 3-step process is very simple. Physical motion, call it out, and then we're going to reroute and reinforce. So the first piece is physical motion. What this does is it interrupts your brain from just kind of going all over the place or kind of going into that spiral, right? So physical motion could be anything. It could be clapping your hands, snapping your fingers, tapping your foot. If you're in maybe a Zoom meeting with work, just taking a deep breath in and out. We really just want to bring some physical awareness to it because it gets you out of your own mind. It gets you out of that spiral of thought. The second part is to call it out because this brings awareness to it. Because again, we have up to 60,000 thoughts per day. We want to bring to the surface what isn't helping us and really create an audit and tracking around the people, the things we're doing, the media we're consuming that isn't really helping, right? That is causing more stress or uncertainty or worry or whatever negative emotion it is. And then the third part is to reroute and reinforce to create those new neural pathways, right? Again, this forest of your mind, these pathways are forming your habits of thinking, feeling, and acting. And the beautiful thing, as I mentioned before, is that these can always be constructed. These are always constantly changing. Your brain is always firing these off, these kind of orbs, right, to blaze out the trails. You might as well start using them to your advantage. So again, physical motion, call it out, reroute, and reinforce. All right. And I want to touch on the dangers of positive thinking a lot because I feel like a lot or often we hear that, well, just kind of force yourself to think positive or force yourself to, think of all the good things in your life. And it's more dangerous to do this because if you don't believe what you're telling yourself internally, what happens is that your brain is very smart, right? And it doesn't believe you. And so you lose a little bit of trust in yourself when you try to force a belief or force a way of thinking on you when you're not truly there at the core. And so instead of going to positive thinking right away, say, maybe you've been feeling a lot of stress or worry recently, instead of just kind of saying out loud or forcing yourself to do affirmations or something like that, what we want to really route to is a neutral thought pattern instead. Neutral thinking is very, very powerful, and it's more important to get to a place of shifting from negative thinking to neutral than it even is to go from neutral to positive. And I'm going to get into why in a moment here. So instead of going right from negative to positive, we want to insert this neutral way of thinking into our process. And 80% of our thoughts are negative naturally, right? That's the primal brain. That's the natural default wiring. And that's why it is easy to go to a place of self-doubt or uncertainty or worry. But the reason why it's important to get to neutral thinking as quickly as we can is because negative thoughts are much more powerful than positive thoughts even. And so we really want to get away from negative, get to neutral, and then from neutral, we can of course go to positive. But since they're 5 to 7 times more powerful than positive, we just want to focus first on getting away from those negative thought patterns. All right. And example negative thoughts are something like, that'll never happen. Everything's horrible right now. We're at a disadvantage here. I'm such a mess. These things are all negative thoughts. There are obviously millions and millions of them. Example neutral thoughts gets you to a place of neutrality, right? When something isn't going as planned or perhaps awry. I take setbacks as temporary. I bounce back quickly. We're going to find a way through. I can learn how to adapt. I have to support myself unconditionally. So we're going to break off into our breakout rooms for the first group exercise. And I want you guys to think about an area of your life that maybe has been causing stress or uncertainty or worry recently, whether it be personally, professionally, whatever it is for you. And think about maybe a negative thought you've been having. And these are some examples, but there's obviously millions of these. And we're often the hardest on ourselves, right? We beat ourselves up the most. And think about what type of neutral thought that you can start creating from one of these negative thoughts. All right. So think about that for a minute as I break you guys off into breakout rooms. And we're going to take a couple minutes here. And what I will do is I'm going to include the prompt when you guys break out into breakout rooms so you can take a look at it and just go around in a circle and share what neutral thought you'd like to start incorporating into your life to shift again that all the people we've interviewed, these are the top ones that they're doing each and every day. And the beautiful thing is it doesn't take very long to start rewiring your mind and really carving out these new trails, just about 2 minutes a day. So the first is gratitude journal and spotlights. And you guys have likely heard of a gratitude journal before. But what it is, every morning or every night, you write down 3 to 5 things that you can feel grateful for in your day or in your life. And the important thing to note here is that you want to focus on the gratitude or the appreciation that you've felt within the past 24 hours. Because often when we think of gratitude, we think, okay, we're thankful for the bigger things like our friends or our family. And it's more important to really focus on the small things, because the more you focus on that and you write them in, your brain is going to filter in more of that as it gets more and more wired. And people have been doing this all across the country. You can, of course, do this in a notebook or a journal, but you can also do it with your family or friends via text message or FaceTime or whatever. And the beautiful thing is really sharing these things we're grateful for or appreciative for can trigger a lot of other great emotions or things in other people that they might not have thought of that they could appreciate. And so it's really, really powerful to do. You can also do this in meetings. A lot of companies I work with, they're now starting off their meetings with a gratitude spotlight. So they're, having, it only takes about a minute or two, having everyone go around and saying what they're grateful for in that moment. All right, so as we're keeping going, feel free to, again, type in the chat a couple things you're grateful for today, and make it ideally things that you're grateful for in the last 24 hours. So I'll give you guys an example from my own life. I love coffee, and I just went to Trader Joe's and I got one of those the cans of coffee. And I kind of took off that aluminum foil at the top, peeled it back, and I got hit with the coffee bean smell, and it was just amazing, right? And so I'll write that down in my gratitude journal. It's these small moments, but when you start really focusing on that, it's going to craft your brain and really carve out your brain to go towards those and recognize those small moments more and more. So go ahead and type in the chat what you are grateful for today. Hopefully it can be a very small thing, but you can, of course, acknowledge bigger things as well. Now, starting your day proactively is very, very important to do in order to create this positive mindset. And what we recommend doing, because often morning routines, at least in my own experience, it kind of seems like this big undertaking where you have to spend, an hour doing all the things to start your morning off right. And for most people, that's just not practical, or you just don't want to spend that long in the morning setting your day up proactively. So I'm there with you. And what we recommend doing is that instead of starting off your day like this, which is what most of the country does, right? What happens when you wake up in the morning, whether it be to your alarm or naturally on your own, is most people will grab their cell phone and start scrolling through it, right? Whether it be your emails, your text messages, social media, the news. And I don't know about you, but quite often these things can trigger stress, or can trigger worry, or can trigger not the most ideal emotion. And what you're doing is you're actually starting your day off reactively, not proactively, because you're giving away your attention, your energy, really the start of your day, to these external factors. So it's important to take back control. And we recommend doing this by asking yourself 3 questions in the morning. So number 1 is, what am I looking forward to today? And instead of looking at your phone right away, just put your phone on airplane mode for about a minute and answer these questions, ideally in a notebook, but you can also just say them out loud or think them to yourself as well. So what are you looking forward to today? What is potential to stress you out today, and how are you going to choose to respond to it? And finally, how do I want to feel at the end of today, and what needs to happen to make that a reality? And again, these questions are also in that free workbook we have for you guys, so don't feel the need to write them down quickly unless you'd like to. But for our next group exercise, what we're going to do is think about another morning question besides these that you can ask yourself at the start of the day in order to start your day proactively and to really set the day off in a more positive light. All right, so we're going to break off one more time into breakout rooms here. All right, and as everyone comes back in, again, just like we did last time, if you could share that question that either was your own or you heard from someone else, that would be amazing. So we can get that knowledge and have a ton of questions that we can incorporate. All right, so the final thing before we wrap up and have Q&A at the end here for a couple minutes is letters of appreciation. So this is pretty straightforward, either writing a physical old school postcard or letter to someone that you appreciate or you care about, or you could send a nice text or email. And we have free cards on our website here. You can send these to anyone in America. They say you're incredible, and then you just write the note on the back. We'll mail it out in the mail for you. I'll share the link for that in a second. But really, these letters of appreciation can make a tremendous impact in someone's life, probably more than you even will realize. I have a friend who, she's been really having a tough time at work. She's been, kind of under a lot of stress and had this huge presentation she had to give. And at the end of the presentation the other day, one of her coworkers, who she doesn't even really know that well, sent her a one-line email just saying that she really enjoyed the presentation. She could tell that my friend's name is Becca, put a lot of work into the presentation. And Becca rereads that email every single day, right? She really appreciated it. And it probably took her coworker about 5 seconds to send. So just sending a text to someone that you appreciate them, that you find them amazing, can be really, really powerful. And again, it's firing off those neurons in your brain to create those pathways, because you're thinking about the other people you appreciate in your own life, and it has an impact on them as well. So this is the site where you can send the free postcard. Again, it'll also be in the workbook, so you guys have that info. So as I mentioned before we get into Q&A, consistency really is powerful. And often I hear, especially with the gratitude journals, is that people just forget to do it. And I've been in that boat too. You just, you started off, maybe you could do it for a week or two, are excited about it, and kind of fall off. And so it's important to set a reminder or put it in your calendar or leave a notebook on your bed or on your couch where you remember to do it. And the beautiful thing about keeping a gratitude journal or keeping record of those morning questions, the answers each and every day, is that when you are having kind of maybe a tough day, or just kind of feeling kind of blah about life, you can go back and you have this beautiful track record of all the good things in your life, really of your life. And so it's really, really nice to be able to keep track of all these things. And I recommend, setting an alarm, putting it in your calendar, or leaving a notebook right on your pillow, or, on your couch, in order to make sure it's happening. So as we talked about today, combining these two factors, our research as well as the neuroscience, and we have individual programs as well as more team workshops for companies and schools. And here's the website for that Science of Happiness workbook.